الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده. باب ما جاء في شعر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. So last time we concluded the previous chapter and we reached the chapter on the blessed hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So in this chapter, Imam Tirmidhii has compiled those ahadith in which the blessed hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has been described. Imam Tirmidhii has brought a collection, has mentioned 8 ahadith regarding the blessed hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So at the narrators, you'll get different, like was mentioned in the first chapter. Sometimes some narrators mention that the hair reached to the earlobes. Some of the narrators, they mentioned it reached to the shoulders. Some between the earlobes and the shoulders. So according to when the narrator, he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at different times, the narrator narrated accordingly. So there is no conflict of narrations, but according to when the narrator, when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam would keep his hair long, then according to that, the narrator has mentioned, according that the hair reached to the shoulders. When Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam cut his hair, then the narrator mentioned according to that time when he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had short hair, he mentioned that. So there is no conflict of narrations, but according to the time where the narrator saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this had been mentioned. But generally, the majority of the scholars, they mentioned it was the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to keep long hair and not to keep short hair. And only in very few places it has been mentioned that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam cut his hair very, very short. But apart from that, it was generally the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to keep long hair. So we'll take a look at the hadith. The first hadith in the chapter in which وبه قال حدثنا علي بن حجر قال أنبأنا إسماعيل بن إبراهيم عن حميد عن أنس بن مالك قال كان شعر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إلى نصف أذنيه. Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, he narrates that his description from what he understood and what he saw, كان شعر can be read with the ayn with the sakin, شعر, and it can also be read شعر with بفتح العين. The hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was to nisfi udhunay, midway down his ear, not to the earlobes, but midway down his ear. So this is when Hazrat Anas radiallahu anhu, this is his narration. In the next narration, وبه قال حدثنا حناد بن سري قال حدثنا عبد الرحمن بن أبي الزناد عن هشام بن عروة عن أبيه عن عائشة قالت كنت أغتسل أنا ورسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من إناء واحد فكان له شعر فوق الجمة ودون الوفرة. So this narration is from Aisha radiallahu anha. She mentions that كنت أغتسل أنا ورسول, I and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would bathe from من إناء واحد, from one from the same, not utensil, but from one vessel. So I and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would bathe from one vessel. And وَكَانَ لَهُ. So from here, this first part of the hadith, that Aisha radiallahu anha, she mentions that she herself and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would bathe from one vessel. So the scholars, they have unanimously agreed that it's permissible for the husband and wife to bathe from one vessel. This does not necessarily mean that both people, the Hazrat Aisha and Rasulullah, they were undressed at the time, but because explicitly Hazrat Aisha, she mentions that I never saw the private parts of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he never saw mine. So it could possibly mean that Hazrat Aisha, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam bathed first, and the remaining water Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha she used and she bathed afterwards, or vice versa. Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha she bathed first, and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam used the remaining water and he bathed afterwards. And the part that relating to this chapter, كان يبلغ شعره شحمة أذنيه. And the Mubarak hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was longer than those that reached the earlobes, and was less than that reached the shoulders. So this is the narration in which he mentions between the earlobes and between the shoulders. and also previous before that, لم يكن بالجعد ولا بالسبط, and the head of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not perfectly straight, very straight, like has been mentioned in the first chapter, and it wasn't very curly, but it was moderately between both descriptions. Then the next hadith, وَبِهِ قال حدثنا محمد بن يحيى بن أبي عمر قال حدثنا سفيان بن عيينة عن ابن أبي نجيه عن مجاهد عن أم هانئ بنت أبي طالب قالت قدم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم مكة قدمة وله 4 غدائر. Hani bint Abi Talib radiallahu anha, she narrates that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam came to Mecca and he had وَلَهُ أَرْبَعُ غَدَائِرٍ, and the condition of his hair was such that he had his Mubarak hair had 4 plaits. So now here, it does not, when أَرْبَعُ غَدَائِرٍ, the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in no manner whatsoever resembled the hair of other women. There was no resemblance. But this is what, when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam kept his hair long, then at the tail of the hair, it would seem as if there were plaits, and he had arba'u ghada'ir. But it is, the scholars have mentioned, for men to emulate the hair of women, this is makruh, undesirable. So in no manner in which this description has been given does it mean that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his hair resembled that of a woman, but in no manner whatsoever it resembled the hair of any woman. And on this, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he came to Makkah al-Mukarramah, he mentioned that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to Makkah after the migration. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam returned to Makkah al-Mukarramah 4 times. The first time was with the hair, recording the hair. After the time of Umratul Qada in the 7th year Hijri. In the previous year, at the time of Sulh Hudaybiyah, they were prevented from entering Makkah, so they retained the following year, and this was known as Umratul Qada, in the 7th year after migration. After this, it was the following year, in the year in which the conquest of Makkah took place, Fath Makkah, in the 8th year of Hijri. And in that same journey, in the conquest of Makkah, there was another Umrah was performed, Umratul Ja'irana. That's the 3rd time, and the 4th time was in the 10th year for Hijri, at the time of the farewell Hajj. Then وَبِهِ قَالَ حَدَّثَنَا سُوَيْدُ, and this hadith is mentioned قَدِمَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم Makkah. It refers to, one famous scholar has mentioned, Bayjuri has mentioned that this was the time of the Fath Makkah, the conquest of Makkah. It was not the first 3 times, but it was the last time. It was the time of the conquest of Makkah. Then the next hadith, وَبِهِ قَالَ حَدَّثْنَا سُوَيْدُ بْنُ نَصْرٍ قَالَ حَدَّثْنَا عَبْدُ اللَّهِ بْنُ الْمُبَارَكِ عن معمر عن ثابت البناني عن أنس أن شعر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كان إلى أنصاف أذنين. So here again, Anas radiallahu mentions that the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was midway down his ears. إلى أنصاف أذنين. The next hadith, وبه قال حدثنا سويد بن نصر قال حدثنا عبد الله بن المبارك عن يونس بن يزيد عن الزهري قال حدثنا عبيد الله بن عبد الله بن عتبة عن ابن عباس أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يسدل شعره فكان المشركون يفرقون رؤوسهم وكان أهل الكتاب يسدلون رؤوسهم وكان يحب موافقة أهل الكتاب فيما لم يؤمر فيه بشيء ثم فرق رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم رأسه. So this is the narration from Ibn Abbas. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma mentions that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam كان يسدل شعره, used to leave his hair the way it naturally was. يسدل شعره, used to leave in its natural how it was naturally. وكان المشركون, and at the time وكان المشركون يفرقون رؤوسهم. And the reason for this was that وكان المشركون, the non-believers, the mushrikun, the people, the idol worshippers, يفرقون رؤوسهم, used to make a path in their hair. And at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, initially, وكان أهل الكتاب, the people of the kitab, referring to the Christians and the Jews, they used to follow with the religion of Isa alayhi salam and Musa alayhi salam. They used to follow somewhat of a book. يسدلون رؤوسهم, they used to leave their hair naturally. So on one side you had the mushrikun, the idol worshippers, the mushrikun, they used to ascribe partners to Allah. They used to part their hair in the middle, and the Ahlul Kitab, the Christians and the Jews, they would leave their hair naturally how it was. وكان يحب موافقة أهل الكتاب فيما لم يؤمن فيه بشيء. And Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam would prefer, would like to موافقة أهل الكتاب, to follow the way of the Ahlul Kitab, in which Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not given a particular instruction, and not to follow the ways of the mushrikun, the non-believers, the polytheists. So when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not given an instruction, given a command regarding anything, in those matters, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would prefer to follow the way of the Ahlul Kitab, because initially somewhat of what they followed was from the teachings of Isa alayhi salam and Musa alayhi salam, and the mushrikun, they had nothing. They were idol worshippers. They had no basis for following anything. This was initially how it was first. But then ثم فرق رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم رأسه. But then later on this was abrogated, and Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam then began opposing the ways of the Ahlul Kitab. The Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam would also oppose the way of the Ahlul Kitab, and he would part his hair in the middle, and he would perfectly. It comes on Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam straight from the middle. Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha, she mentions that she would part the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam equally on both sides, to the left and the right, from the beginning of this part of the head going back, and split the hair in two. And that last hadith in this chapter, وبه قال حدثنا محمد بن بشار قال حدثنا عبد الرحمن بن مهدي عن إبراهيم بن نافع المكي عن ابن أبي نجيح عن مجاهد عن أم هانئ قالت رأيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ذات ضفائر أربع. So this is again another hadith mentioning where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam had plaits in his hair. So Hani radiallahu anha, she mentions that I saw Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam with 4 plaits or 4 locks in his hair. And this is a similar hadith has just previously been mentioned. So a few extra notes on this regarding the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allama Sakhawi rahimahullah mentions that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam only shaved his hair on 4 occasions after his migration to Medina, in which the 4 places were mentioned earlier on. That was at the time of, on the occasion of, number 1, Hudaybiyah. Secondly, on the occasion of Umratul Qadha, the compensational Umrah they had to do the following year. The 3rd time was the Umrah that was commenced from Ja'irana, and 4th time during the farewell Hajj, because it was after a person leaves from the state, comes out to the state of Ihram, this has to be done. Otherwise, it was the habit of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to keep long hair. And regarding the plaits of the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he mentions that this probably happened during the time of a journey, and that this, and it has been mentioned in the commentary on this, is that this was only in exceptional cases and it was not a regular habit. That Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's hair sometimes would reach its full length, and it would form knocks at the base of the hair resembling plates. And just for people studying Arabic, or Hafiz Iraqi mentions there are a few terms that come in our hadith which describes the length of Rasulullah, hair length of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the words that come are wafra, jamma, and limma. Wafra refers to the hair that reaches the earlobe. Jamma refers to the hair that reaches the shoulder. And limma refers to the hair that goes beyond the earlobe but not to the shoulder. So once again, wafra refers to the hair that reaches the earlobe. Jamma refers to the hair that reaches the shoulder. And limma refers to the hair that goes beyond the earlobe. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the true love for Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and give us the ability to emulate Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in all aspects of our life, in the appearance, in his sunnah, and all other aspects of our life as well. So inshallah, this was the conclusion of this chapter, and we'll begin the next chapter next week, inshallah.